Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the special meeting today. We're going to be led in the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'm breaking with tradition for Mr. Forget to lead the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. Please remain standing as we honor our graduates and we wish them a very successful, healthy, and happy life. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Forget. Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Burton? Here. Ms. Green? Here. Dr. Henderson? Mr. Howard? Here. Mr. Levenstein? Here. Ms. Maida? Here. Ms. Mineo?
Here.
Mr. Stridiron? Here. Mr. Walker?
Here.
Be it resolved that the Board of Education hereby recesses into executive session for the following purpose: employment history of particular individuals and to obtain advice from legal counsel. I'd like to entertain a motion, please. So moved. Second. Roll call.
Ms. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Howard? Yes. Mr. Levenstein? Yes. Ms. Maida? Yes. Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron? Yes. Mr. Walker?
Here.
Ms. Burton?
This should be a brief executive session, so I'm hoping we'll be back in. It was a nice brief executive session. So we're going to go to our Assistant Superintendent for Finance, Ms. Roaring.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to present items 2.1 and 2.2 for consent today related to our capital project bid awards.
Would any member like to separate out any of these items? I'd like to entertain a motion, please. Second. Questions or discussion? Yes, sir.
So I just would like to be a little clear on what's going forward on these. We're using some COVID funds to offset ventilation costs in these two buildings, and that ends up helping to reduce the rise in construction costs that we have. But also, I think this is true, and I think it should be public, that we've also allocated $2.5 million for the interior roadway at Heritage as part of this, is to address the safety concerns there. Is that correct?
Mr. Forget, Ms. Roaring, can you help us?
I would actually welcome Mr. Amjad to the microphone at the end of the table, please, if you could respond.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Mr. Amjad,
Please come to the table.
right there.
Here.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First, I just wanted to thank you for your support with the use of the CRISA funds. They were earmarked directly for the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning work in the schools, and it enabled us to use those funds to pay for the mechanical work at Heritage and Vales Gate. And the offset from that in our capital funds, to Mr. Levenstein's point, enabled us to set aside some very important work in beginning, in accelerating the research necessary to move ahead with the design of a potential road into Heritage's campus. Right now, there's just one road, and the congestion, the safety is a concern, logistics, there are a number of different cohorts that drop off at the school, parents drop off, school busing drop off, and the current layout is convoluted, for lack of a better word. So these resources will enable us to move forward as quickly as possible with a solution.
Thank you. And the only other thing I would like to ask is the add alternates or items that maybe were on a wish list to use on these buildings. It looks like there's just the one for Vales Gate that's here, And I was wondering if it's possible to get a list of the ad alternates that were dropped because the money isn't there for that, for the two buildings.
Yes, absolutely. The two alternates that were taken, there were two alternates taken. One was for the controls because that was still under research to determine scope versus the bid that was submitted. And it was very important for us to include the awning entryway at Vales Gate. Anyone that knows the front end and the layout of Vales Gate, if you look at it, essentially has two separate entrances. And over the years, it's always created confusion about where the main entrance was. So this was an expenditure to clearly clearly illustrate and dedicate the correct entrance to the, which coincides with the security protocol for the school.
Thank you, Mr. Ramjuk.
Board members, yes, Mr. Stradone.
So Mr. Levinstein mentioned $200,000 for a roadway design possible, or is that, what about the existing pavement that's in disrepair? Is that going to be repaired as part of any of this money?
$2.5
Yes.
million, I mentioned.
Yeah, the set aside is anybody hear me okay? The set aside is $2.5 million in the offset from the CRISA monies. That is, in order to do it correctly, we don't know what the final cost is because that research hasn't been done, but we wanted to make sure that we had resources in place to do a thorough job. Initially, looking at the layout, there was thoughts about expanding the existing. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, to the other question, that road will be paved. That's existing there now. So that's part of the capital project. The additional resources that we're talking about is for potential for a separate entrance and a separate landing at the higher elevation so that there can be a different area for drop-off. The specifics I couldn't speak to now because we haven't done the actual research. First steps are to pull together the committee, hire the necessary professionals, and get everyone together to ascertain what the core issues are, and therefore what the solutions are to, and then we will move forward to design from there.
So the current driveway that's there, that's not going to be repaired until the entire plan is done?
Yes, and the reason for that is because, well, towards the end of the capital project, which is, right now it's earmarked for September of 2023. In that summer period, and the reason for that is because there's going to be so much vehicular traffic coming from the construction that should it be paved any earlier, would just be destroyed. So the summer before September of 2023 is when it's intended that those roadways be paved.
As a follow-up, what items that were in the original presentation to the public on the 3 schools that are in these bids is going to be removed? There should be a master list of this is what the public voted on, and then another list with red lines through stuff that's not going to get done.
Correct.
Do we have that?
Yes, we do, and we can provide that for you.
I would like to see it on the website.
Okay.
Thank you.
But I think to answer your question, for this particular...
You have to come to the microphone, sir.
Thank you. That was loud.
Morning. I think to answer your question in regards to the recommendations today, it's the recommendations or what was promised to the community. So there's nothing that was taken out. So when we value engineered the project, it was really looking at, types of flooring, types of finishes, things like that. And to that point, we had an ad alternate for the covered walkway going into Vales Gate. That was promised to the community. We wanted that as an alternate just to see what that price was, but we're still making a recommendation for that alternate to be part of the total package because that was what was promised to the community. So at this point, what we're recommending is exactly what was promised.
Do you have another question, sir?
Ms. Burton has one.
Go ahead, Ms. Burke.
So So when we have these contracts, is there not some kind of contingency plan or contingency clause around, at the end of the day, you don't know what might change, right? So when we put forth, a vote to the community, is there language, or can we begin to add language if it's not there, that these are contingent upon, bids, it's contingent upon funds, it's contingent upon anything, and, given where we are now, where, everything has been, inflated, the costs, I mean, some of this just makes sense that, you just don't know what you're going to find until you start digging sometimes. So I guess, is that anything that we can add when we're asking the public, or, saying this is our capital campaign, however, in some kind of, information that says this is all contingent upon X, Y, and Z?
Ms. Shaw?
Thank you. So when the project went out for the approval of the voters and then subsequently was bonded, what was set forth in scope was not so specific in detail so as to not permit modifications within the greater concepts. And I think that was what was being referred to prior as value engineering, to ensure that the costs of any modifications that might be precipitated by changed circumstances are subsumed within the professional obligations of those that you contract with, in order to ensure that the project gets done within the parameters of the scope approved by the voters and bonded by the district.
Yes, sir.
So I understand that things change, but the purpose of the capital project presentations was to get input from the schools, the public, what we needed. And the need itself doesn't change. If they're going to say we're going to add 5 classrooms, another art room, a music room, that should stay. And I can't see how everything is included in these bids when they're 30, 40% over budget, the original budget. So something has got to be taken away at some point. So we need every school to have the list of what was presented, and then a running, side by side, and on a running list, what is taken out or what was added. So, red taken out, blue added. So it's simple for the public to see on one presentation what the changes were as over time.
Mr. Stradine, would you add cost onto that too?
Oh, yeah, the cost has to be included. And then follow up to the, for the air conditioning. Was it always in the capital bond that the air conditioning systems were going to be taken care of? And the overall district air conditioning systems, it's hit or miss. Window air conditioners in some spots, central air in others, then no ventilation in others. I mean, we have a security booth at Almville, there's no ventilation. They're sitting in a closet. I just don't understand why certain situations are continuing. Every year, there's 85 degrees in the classroom, and the air conditioning wasn't turned on, or something happened with the controls. Do we control our own air conditioning, or is it still under the control of Johnson Controls? And when does that switch take place?
Mr. Ramjug?
Thank you. Thanks, Mrs. Stradine. And I would agree with you. We do have a hodgepodge of types of air conditioning systems, including upwards of 520 window units in individual classrooms, one main central system at Maine, a couple of satellite ones at North. And that was the premise of the planning behind the Proposition 5 resources, was to put air conditioning in all of the schools to the largest degree possible. Our initial look was to have as many centralized systems for the sake of long-term efficiency, to have centralized systems installed. So yes, that is the plan, and we will fulfill that plan to the degree that our dollar carries us. So as part of looking at the costs of the air conditioning, we had the energy performance contract, which preceded this capital work. And we took advantage of having the savings generated from new controls, as well as the building aid that's generated, to keep the control system in that project. And as I'm speaking to you now, we're on the very tail end of having that 100% replaced district-wide, all buildings. So the history of that is also a bit of considerably hodgepodge, including the antiquated pneumatic systems, if you know anything about that. So we standardized to Johnson Controls product. It's all installed. There's some tweaking that's going on right now, so that's a huge step forward, which will integrate into the new into the existing HVAC systems and the new air conditioning systems.
So this becomes quite complicated. So just a fundamental question. When a capital bond, when it goes to the voter, and at what point when we're over budget, what happens? I mean, I just don't know, because I think this is going to keep coming up, and I'm not sure why, because we have all of these layers, and exactly what he just said. I remember this, right, in terms of the energy information, but I'm not clear on what happens when we exceed a capital bond that the voters voted on. What happens? You know, are we obligated to come back and say something to them by law? I just don't know.
Ms.
Because I just
Roaring?
think this is going to keep coming up.
So I think it is going to be incumbent upon the district to explain to the community what we are able to accomplish. We are not able to exceed the authorization. So if they gave us $225 million, say that's the number, that's all we have to spend. So we accomplish what we can within those parameters, and it's important that we're keeping them posted on what that looks like as we're seeing these escalating costs.
Thank you.
Anybody else, any other questions? Okay. Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Howard? Mr. Levinstein? Ms. Maida? Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron?
Yes.
Mr. Walker? Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Ms. Green?
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk, or Madam President. That concludes my items.
Thank you, Ms. Roaring. We're going to move on to our Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources, Mr. McLemore.
Thank you, Madam President. On the Human Resources agenda, I have items 3.1 through 3.3 for your consideration on today.
Would any member like to separate out any of these items? I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
Second.
Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Levinstein? Ms. Maida? Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron?
Yes.
Mr. Walker? Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Ms. Green? Mr. Howard?
That concludes my items, Madam President. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLemore. I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting, please.
Second.
Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Maida? Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron?
Yes.
Mr. Walker? Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Ms. Green? Mr. Howard? Mr. Levinstein?